Hey everyone. Please support what I do to help keep Greyhawk alive by subscribing to the channel. Also, please consider becoming a channel member to get early access to videos, exclusive live chats, quarterly adventure modules, and more. Thanks, and enjoy the show.
So the whole question of player consent and safety tools and X cards and all that stuff has reared its ugly head again. And I want to talk about it today on Greyhawk Grognard. Oh, and real quick, spoiler alert for the Beyond Fendelver and Beyond, or Fendelver and Below, or whatever it's called. Uh, spoiler. Also, spoiler for a episode of the Twilight Zone from like 50 years ago. So you've been warned. So the question of safety tools and um, consent forms and stuff like that in role playing games has been around for a while, at least as far back as 2016 and possibly further back than that. It's come up once again because of something in an upcoming, which is the Coast book, Fandelver and Beyond or Beneath or something like that, where there's they explicitly say in the dungeon adventure that player consent is required, and let me show you what I mean by that. So this is a screenshot from said book, and it deals with character transformation. Apparently, something happens in the scenario where potentially there are magical effects that could turn your characters into mind flayers or something weird like that. Oh, spoiler alert! Uh, but what gets me is the boxed text there. Player consent is required. Before you use the character transformation rules presented in this section, check with each player to determine if they are open to their character experiencing physically transformative effects. A player will not miss game benefits if they choose not to use these rules for their character. Yeah, and this is in an official Wizards of the Coast book. You knew this was coming. Um, and he says, "Oh, it's not surprising by any stretch of the imagination." And it does. This screenshot is a little ambiguous because it does say the following optional rules allow you to track the effects of far realm influence on characters, and then it said player consent is required. Is player consent being required one of those optional rules? It's not entirely clear from the screenshot that we got, but it really seems to me based on it says that the following optional rules are about tracking the effects. Um, that those are the optional rules, not the fact that consent is required. So I'm going to go on that assumption. And if it turns out not to be true, it still doesn't affect the overall point that I'm going to make in this video. But this is the context for why I'm talking about this now. So that's where I'm coming from this. But just a little background in general on the whole concept here. There was something called X cards. The concept was introduced in 2016 by Rory Bristol over on geekdad.com. And basically, if you're at a game, you have an index card with an X on one side and a smiley face on the other. And if you like what's going on, the smiley face is up. And if you don't like what happens in the game, you can flip over your card, boom, and now X, and then everything's got to stop, and the game has to change to accommodate your wishes, basically. And a lot of people from the usual suspects loved the idea, and the usual suspects hated the idea, like me. And then later on, we get the consent in gaming book, which was written by Sean Reynolds and Shanna Germain, and that's the book that has this kind of checklist of things that you love to have it in the game. You're okay if it's not too bad, and you do not want it included in the game that you're playing in. And these things come in there's all kinds of things that you can say no, you're not, you as the GM are not allowed to do this because I don't want to play in a game that has this. And it's stuff like bugs, blood, demons, eyeballs, gore, harm to animals or children, rats, spiders, heat stroke, claustrophobia, freezing to death, police, Rats. They have rats twice because they love rats, I guess. Starvation, thirst, weather, homophobia, racism, real world religion, sexism, and specific cultural issues, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. So you get this you get this thing, and you're supposed to turn, you fill this out and you turn it in your DM, and now the DM is supposedly constrained by your likes or dislikes at the table. These are, and there's a couple other things floating around in the same vein, but that's the gist of it. Is basically the players at the table are given the power over the game as a whole and over the DM specifically to basically limit the things that can be in the game. And if it hasn't become obvious yet, I'm against this. I think it's nonsense, especially in a adventure game such as Dungeons and Dragons that emphasizes magic and the occult and the fantasy occult and violence in the form of combat and things like that. You struggle against the elements and is a big part of the game as well in some scenarios. So you're basically picking and choosing what parts of the game you want to apply. And what really got me was earlier this year, I think it was in February, on Chaosium's official channel, they actually had a video uh, saying how you can implement these things in Call of Cthulhu. It's- and I would love to see a game of Call of Cthulhu that doesn't involve gore or rats or spiders or blood or demons or insanity or stuff like that. I mean, it's just it's too, pardon the pun. That's insane to think that you can apply this kind of thing to Call of Cthulhu, because that is at the core of what Call of Cthulhu is. Um, if you don't like some of the elements that you know are likely to come up in Call of Cthulhu because they are in the rules, then you don't play Call of Cthulhu. And in the same vein, if let's take it a step back and apply this to some other kinds of games. If you're playing Monopoly and you don't want to go bankrupt, because you have a thing about going bankrupt. You went bankrupt, or your family went bankrupt, and it was a horrible, traumatic experience. Um, and yet, in the game, there are rules for bankruptcy. Well, you can't just raise your X card and say, "No, I'm not going to go bankrupt." And then all the other players just kind of look at you like, "What do you mean? You'd say you don't have any money. You're going to go bankrupt." Um, but no, I have my X card, and I can't deal with that. So we're gonna have to reverse it. And it's the same thing. The same principle applies in a role playing game. If you're in a role playing game like Call of Cthulhu, where horror is the basic premise of the game. You're at, a lot of things take place at night, and there is body horror, and there are elder beings, and there is a lot of insanity and death and things like that. You can't then turn around and say, well, no, I don't like this game. I don't like this aspect of the game that I chose to play, so I'm going to pull up my X card, or I'm going to hand in my sheet that says, oh no, you can't use this, and this. Um, because you're not just changing the game for yourself when you do that. You're changing the game for everybody else at the table. And I don't think that it's fair to let the limitations of one person be applied to limit everyone else at the table. So let's say you don't like rats, and you're going to a game of Dungeons and Dragons where giant rats are a thing. They're one of the most commonly found monsters on first level dungeons, right? They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. And then later on, you're going to have giant. You're going to have rat men. You can have there's all kinds of beasts. Dire rats and crap like that. There's all kinds of rat related stuff in the game. So you are arbitrarily and unilaterally going to say, well, you can't use any of those rules. Well, then you're not playing Dungeons and Dragons. You don't want to play Dungeons and Dragons because Dungeons and Dragons is a game that has rats. So why play that? You should be off playing something else that doesn't have the thing you don't like I don't know, Maid or Life with Master or something like that. A game that has different rules that does not include those things that you don't like. Character death, perfect example. There's a lot. Nowadays, there's a thing where if I don't want my character to die, or in the example that I gave at the beginning, I don't want my character to be transformed into an abomination from another world. Well, you're in a game, Dungeons and Dragons, where stuff like that can happen. In my favorite edition of the rules, the first edition, you had stuff like the girdle of femininity or masculinity, or the helm of opposite alignment. You have books that can, you have monsters that can lower your level. They can drain levels from you. In the original game. Nowadays, they've nerfed that. But there's other things in there to which a player might object because they don't want their beautiful character to be marred in that way. But my retort to that would be, this is a game in which, by sitting down to play, you are accepting the possibility that your character's going to die. That's right there. This is a game in which characters die. And if you don't want to play in a game where characters can die, rather than forcing everyone else to change the game to accommodate you, you should be playing another game. There are a zillion games out there where your character simply can't die. There are mechanics built into the game where you can be safe from the possibility that your character is going to die or is going to get disfigured or whatever. And you should honestly, frankly, be playing that game rather than telling everyone else at the table who, and I'm not trying to minimize other people's, phobias or mental states or whatever. I'm honestly not trying to do that. But rather than forcing everybody to play at your level, where the level of danger is artificially low, because I don't want to see demons, or I don't want there to be gore, or I don't want the possibility that my character is going to freeze to death walking through the tundra without any cloaks or protection or anything. You're artificially changing the boundaries of the game, not for you, but for everybody at the table. And I don't think that that is fair. Just in the same way that if somebody comes along and can't, let's say somebody is in a wheelchair and they can't play basketball, and yet they go and they try out for the basketball team, and the guy said, "Well, you can't play basketball, you can't run." Well, how is that fair? Well, there are basketball leagues right over there of people playing basketball in wheelchairs. You should go over there. In the same way, there are entire role-playing games, fantasy role-playing games, where you don't see this stuff, where it is in a mode where your character is almost never going to die, or will never ever die, because there are game mechanics built in to prevent that from happening. Fifth edition D&D is close to that. I mean, with these death saves and all this stuff. But giant rats are still a thing, and giant spiders are still a thing. And there are games over there that don't have giant rats and don't have giant spiders. They have other things. But when you do that, when you are artificially lowering the challenge rating for you and everybody else at the table because you're not comfortable with people dying from frostbite, it's not fair to them. So go to an alternative where your needs will be accommodated. It's very simple. Rather than changing this game, go over there and play that game that doesn't have that thing that you don't like. It's not that hard. There are a zillion role-playing games out there, and I guarantee you, somewhere out there is a game that people with your particular red lines where you don't want to go can go. So for example, I personally don't like the idea of, I don't know, children being killed, and yet I can still play in a game where I know it's a possibility because that gives me something to strive against, rather than not being able to function in the game because it's a possibility, or because I fail and it does happen. Failure is an option in a game like this. And a lot of people today don't seem to like that idea because they think it's a fantasy role-playing game, so it's a fantasy game. So I should be able to indulge my fantasies, and in my fantasies, I never die, I never lose, I always beat the bad guy. Dungeons and Dragons is not that game. There are games that are like that. They're over there. Fate, I think, is something like that, where you can, you have the dice and you can change what happens. And, there are other games where you can steer the course of the game. Players are explicitly given, tokens or cards or points or whatever. I forget the mechanics, but there's a bunch out there where the players themselves can actually change the course of the narrative through game mechanics. Rather than just holding up an X card and saying, no, I don't like this, you got to do something else, or I don't want my character to die, or so you gotta change that outcome. There are games that will do that for you because it's in the game. And that is my suggestion for people who don't like all of the possibilities that Dungeons and Dragons gives. I happen to like those. That's why I play Dungeons and Dragons rather than Life with Master or Maid or whatever, is because I want to have those possibilities, and I enjoy striving against those odds, and I enjoy defying the possibility that I'm going to fail. Even if that means sometimes I do fail. Because you know what? Just like life, that makes the game better. And that calls to mind an old Twilight Zone episode. It's called A Nice Place to Visit, where a small-time hoodlum gets shot and killed and wakes up and he's in heaven. And, he can't lose. He's rich. He gambles. He can't lose a bet in a casino. He tries to rob a place, and everything is set up so that he'll get away with the loot. There's no challenge. There's no possibility that he's ever going to lose. And the kicker is that he's not in heaven. He's actually in hell, and that is hell. Hell is never losing. For him, anyway. So I always thought that was very cool and very instructive idea for exactly the situation, is that a game that you can never lose isn't really a game, and thus there is no point in trying to play. Now, I'm sure somebody out there is going to say in the comments, or saying to themselves now, well, but changing the game, then why not just change the game so that it's more accessible for everybody, rather than being closed off to a certain group of people who don't like these things. And I would argue that my argument that I laid out before still stands. And in fact, that solution is even worse, because you're not just inflicting your limitations on that table. You're inflicting them on every gamer everywhere who plays by the rules, who doesn't want to have to change the rules to go backwards to what they were originally before they were adulterated by people trying to go to the lowest common denominator. That's even worse. If you want to do that, then make your own game. Make your own game where characters don't die. But don't come along and change the game after 50 years for everyone because you have a particular specific issue. Don't take giant rats out of the game because you don't like rats. Don't take player death out of the game because you don't want your character to die. If it's that important, make your own game and play that. But don't impose your choices on everyone else. So anyway, tell me what you think in the comments. I know I'm going to get a ton, and hope you're having a great day.
Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.